without further ado, we're running a few minutes behind now, but I want to introduce Vana, who's going to introduce Lydia, our first speaker for today. All right, so Vana needs no introduction. Vana Fury is one of the leading practitioners in the U.S. and globally. She has, I don't want to make her sound old. She has decades of experience, though, working with organizations, particularly, and all kinds of interesting populations. She's an amazing practitioner, a former professor of philosophy, and a great practitioner, former president of the ASPCP, a founding director and vice president of APPA. And she's published amazing articles on all kinds of subjects: art, spirituality, all analytic topics in philosophical practice, book chapters. Has been a tremendous colleague and a tremendous benefit to APPA in her capacity as really an advisor and a director of the association, and a great friend over the years. So, Vana, I'm going to ask you to please welcome the group and introduce Lydia, who's going to speak to us momentarily, okay? All yours.
Welcome, everybody. I'm just delighted to see so many familiar faces here, and I'm looking forward to meeting some of our next participants in the certification program. So this is going to be lots of fun. And I assume I'll see many of you at the Russian conference as well. So the advantages, there always is advantages to this virtual business, much as I prefer to be with you one-on-one, after meetings, real meetings. But without further ado, I want to introduce my dear friend and colleague, Lydia Amir, who is going to be our first presenter. It would take all morning to list Lydia's credentials. First, I want to say that she has graciously accepted our invitation to become one of the board of directors of APPA. So I now have a female colleague on board, literally. So that's very nice too. So Lydia is currently teaching philosophy at Tufts University. She's president of the Israeli Society for Philosophical Practice and has had a counseling practice of her own since 1992. She's published 2 books on philosophical practice and has generously edited 2 anthologies on, and co-edited on philosophical practice. And during my last email with her, I hear that she has a book coming out on French philosophy. The last 100 years or the first 100 years, who knows, of French philosophy, that's going to be published by Routledge this summer. So I'm really looking forward to that. Lydia seems to write faster than I can read, so I'm still catching up. But anyway, without more ado, we're looking forward to your presentation today, Lydia. As always, I'm sure we'll learn much from it.
Thank you so much, Vana. I'm trying a new device now with a new mic. Can you hear me? Can you hear me?
Very clearly,
Yes?
Lydia, better than last year.
Yeah, because I'm trying this.
Okay.
So thank you so much, Vana, for your kind introduction. Thank you so much, Lou, for your enthusiastic and very interesting introduction. It was great to see that we didn't change much from Vancouver to today. You, Lou, remain so young and enthusiastic, and Vana so interesting and beautiful as she was. And this is a wonderful thing that David has done. I would talk about David in a moment, but I would like really to say that this morning, I think it would be good to open the day with some conversation with you after I talk. I try to talk to 40 minutes, but it may be less, because I really need to hear you, your opinions about the thoughts that I'm going to circulate amongst us. But before that, let me just advertise something of importance, I think, as well. We have just started in Lexington a series of books called Philosophical Practice. Why is it important? Because I think the movement of philosophical practice is in two directions. It's from the academe outside to general society, and then back to the academe to change eventually the way people are teaching in philosophy departments, because actually we are teaching members of society, we are teaching sometimes students that are not necessarily philosophy students that we want to attract to philosophy, and even philosophy students need not suffer. So we would like to change philosophic education in the academy so that it will be more student-oriented, more interest and needs-oriented, more practical, that the teacher in himself would take interest in the practice, not only the theory is expounding, and maybe assistants would follow up the students with their own personal interest and problems, you know, if you're teaching ethics or epistemology or anything else, and also to let academic philosophers know that such a field exists. You know, many times at Tufts University, where I teach now a summer semester, for example, there are meetings with students in which they are talking about non-academic work for philosophers. So philosophical practitioner, it may be a non-academic work for philosophers that academic philosophers are not aware of. They do not know of that. So bringing this information to academic philosopher is important, I think, also for the young generation, for the young philosophers that sometimes finish even PhD and have no idea what to do with that, or especially in America, where you know, the state is so great. You have to travel and find a spouse or a partner, and they both have to work. So one of them usually gives up the career, and usually it's the philosopher, you know, because the lawyer or the engineer helps more the finances of the couple. So this is also something of importance. And also talking about legacy, about the future, maybe having some place where any philosopher would begin. Then if we have books by you, Lou, Vona, other people, in the bibliography, they can find the other books you've published before that. I don't mean that this should be the sole place in which things are published about philosophical practice, but that it will be a good introduction, a variety of views, yes, at a high level, clear, but also interesting for academics. So please bear with me in this endeavor of mine, and if you have projects, just write to me personally about them. I will send you the form, and I can help you with that, and we will be delighted in publishing books in philosophical practice, maybe add it to that website of the, all right? So this, I think, was of importance to say. The second thing is less important, but I'll say it now because hopefully the discussion will be so interesting. So I won't want to cut it with practical issues. You see, I'm teaching a summer semester at Tufts University, and it's 8 hours a week. And then yesterday I had a Zoom also with the Santayana Society, and I have a guest, a philosophy professor from Mexico, also a devout Catholic. And she, the poor woman, is waiting in the apartment all week. I may have to show her a little bit of Boston. So I may have to leave a little bit earlier today, especially since she doesn't have lunch at noon, because she has breakfast only after 9:30, after the mass, you know, long mass. And so lunch may be at 3 o'clock. And so I have here tied up, you know, torn up between my duties as a person who is being visited, a host, and my duties as a philosopher. And thank you very much, a co-director of the APPA. Thank you, Vona. Thank you, Lou. Thank you, the others who accepted gracefully my being aboard. So after this talk, you may regret this decision, because I'm going to bring some topics that are not so easy, that at the beginning of our way, for example, in Vancouver, we did talk about, although I never managed to create quite a controversy amongst philosophers. They either, you know, quarreled and didn't talk, or they didn't criticize each other. But I really, even on the same stage, I could see three different views. I couldn't make the people state what are their differences. So this is one of the things that it's interesting, especially in America, where I teach for the last 7 years. And I see how some topics you cannot discuss, some topics, even if you try, you use the wrong words. Some topics, you know, as a student of mine said about Kant, oh, they didn't know better. So the whole history of philosophy or the Enlightenment or Kant is something superseded completely. And so there is a interesting question about the role of philosophy in today's society, because our students reflect to us the way they perceive society, its scope, its abilities, and its limitation in society. And one of our roles when we meet people, either as clients or as teachers, is to challenge this accepted view, because in a way, this has always been a problem of philosophy. Everybody always thought that we don't need philosophers, yes? So it's always our job, you know, again and again, each generation anew, to show and to explain how we are relevant, more than relevant, necessary, even we are, if we will be put to death, like the first of us, yes? So talking about the pandemic that Lou mentioned, the same David Schumacher that we talked about initiated also a book about philosophers' thought about the pandemic. And I was invited to contribute to that. I think that initially it was in Spanish. And then there was a launching of that book in Spanish. And people were enthusiastic. And I, as always, I don't know, I said that my experience of the pandemic was also that we can see that philosophy is badly needed, but not in the way that psychology is badly needed. Take, for example, critical thinking that usually we thought is very needed and nobody saw the interest in that. So during the pandemic, you could see that people did not have the tools or did not want to use them to make up their mind, for example, about the vaccine and about the news or the fake news, and just maybe even looking at the history of pandemics and the way they were treated, and what to do when there is a breach of faith in the politicians, like all over the world, in the medical corpus, because they were taking side politically. So we could see the importance of the autonomy of the individual, its responsibility, its difficulties in finding out the information, in waiting for himself or herself, and the role that the social media took in that, you know. This is what I would like to emphasize. We were told that because for many years social media gave you only information that went along with what you believe, you are actually incapable of looking for information that is contrary to what you naturally feel attracted to. So this maybe psychologists know better. They will give you whatever you need in order to feel comfortable with the information. And then there will be no critical thinking, and all criticism, all controversy would seem as something hostile and an affront. But this is not a way to advance, not a way to learn. So philosophers have a job there, not only in confronting the people with views that are against what they hold, but also in showing that this is very important. And this is not an unpleasurable process. To the contrary, getting out of your own shell is something absolutely fantastic. And learning various opinions, not this opinion, yes, vaccine or no vaccine, and then decide, not debate in the form, you know, that was developed in some countries, but learning various points of view, learning to argue for them, learning to look for information that is valid or invalid. This is what we call critical thinking. And now we have a fantastic example to give. We don't have to go into, you know, some kind of, I hope, hypothetical example. You may be sick, you have to see one doctor, then the other, then the third. We can talk about the pandemic, and we can make people aware that many medias make sure they receive only things that by association are close to what they already believe, so that they actually impede actively the growth and education. All right? So it's our role first to make sure that we set clear what education oneself means. And it's always getting outside of one's comfort zones. And this is what philosophers usually do. This is what I believe. And this is how I open the topic of today, between truth and falsehood, the special case of illusion for the wise. Because, as you see, I have an assumption about the important role of philosophy, and I would like to make it explicit. I know that philosophers are very needed when it comes to ethics. They are very needed for existential questions. This we all know. But philosophers are indispensable, absolutely necessary when it comes to epistemology. Psychologists do not care, and maybe they should not care. Let's talk about Jung, about, I don't know, the archetypes. They do not care if the clown, God, and other archetypes actually exist outside. It's enough that they are in the human psyche. Philosophers do care. It may seem a little bit redundant, but this is what we are actually good at. This is what makes the difference between us, psychologists, and the new age, or maybe other things of feeling well or positive psychology. This is an edge, and social media may think that this is not an edge, and it's our job to show that this is our edge. This is what we are best at. Also ethics and existential questions, but let me emphasize epistemology. Why emphasize epistemology? Because truth may have been under attack through postmodernism. The book I finished was about 100 years of French philosophy, the last 100 years. I wanted to show and to see what happened to philosophy, how Nietzsche was perceived in France, that changed the face of philosophy and the face of Nietzsche more than any other Nietzsche, even more than the Nazified Nietzsche. So this was the interest of the book for me. So truth was under attack, maybe it still is. Now in America, I'm noting the relativism that we are supposed to embrace. This is something for you to think about. While we can respect each other's ideas, I feel that my students are so shy about their own ideas and values. Religion, it's one of them. You know, to talk with an American about religion is like to talk about sex with a virgin. It's something impossible. So how do you teach, how do you address philosophical questions in an age of relativism? So this is another problem that I'm seeing. Truth may be not under attack, but if it's all relative, so what are we talking about? But today I would like to talk about a special problem that I would like to share with you, which I call the problem of illusion. You know, I'm trying myself to write a book for that Lexington series that will be about meaning, happiness, and misery. I talked about it last year, a little bit about philosophy, scope, and limitations. And I will be talking about philosophy and religion in the next Russian conference, in the workshops, because I think this is a topic that has never been addressed in the philosophical practices conferences. And I think that maybe religious people approach the practicality of philosophy a little bit differently than non-religious people. I think that it will be interesting. Maybe we can make a difference between established religion and maybe general spirituality, and maybe agnosticism and atheism, and see how different kinds of religiosity makes people address philosophy differently. This is one question I asked my very devout Mexican friend. She's also a professor of philosophy. If she knows the truth through Catholicism, what use is philosophy for her? This is actually an interesting question for me. Yeah. So for philosophical practitioners, let's think a little bit about that. Ida Youngsma, which you mentioned, Lou, used to say, she was a philosophical practitioner in Holland, then when people that are religious come to her consultation, she sends them to philosophical practitioners who are religious. So this is a question for you to think. Should we do that now that we're going, you know, online? Yes. Should we do that? Should we encourage this? just begin thinking about philosophy and religion, as I don't want to spoil my workshop in Russia. Why am I mentioning this when I'm talking about illusion? Just to say that the association you may have with illusion, like Freud's book, The Future of an Illusion, he was talking about religion. I am not addressing that. I'm not talking about that. Nor am I talking about another topic. And sorry, it sounds very Jewish. I'm not talking about this. I'm not talking about that. What am I talking about? Yeah. So I'm not talking today about another issue, I think, of importance, in which we may have apparently some illusions also, the topic of justice. I will talk about that also in the Russian conference, not only in the workshop, but in the conference itself. But I want to mention something about that. Listen. I prepared a lecture about cruelty for another organization. And I was astonished to find out that apparently we all have a built-in or an uncritical view of justice that makes us believe that whatever happens, happens for a reason. So if we do not find a reason, we actually blame other people, yes, or we become very hostile. And we just cannot accept that we don't know the reason, or that there is no reason. The contingency of it all, especially if it's threatening, is very difficult. So in that specific lecture, apparently our inbuilt view of justice, or uncritically held view of justice, make us distance ourselves from suffering people or from homeless people. Because if there is justice, so we cannot actually explain that well. So we actually believe, because there is a cause for everything, that it's their fault. It's their fault, so that we don't feel responsible, because we cannot bear the weight of that. Yes. So this question about justice, injustice, uncritically held views of justice, maybe a kind of karma that rules the world. That is not necessarily so. I don't want to go into religious justice. I just said I won't. But philosophers are actually the only one that can pluralistically and critically address various views of justice. And this is at the core of many things that we really do not realize: how we react, how we distance ourselves, and how we throw when we are ill. Many people think that it's the fault of, sometimes they are told it's their own fault. No, that you have to change the way you think about things. So apparently people cannot bear the idea that something happens without a cause that we may know of or understand. We are not very good at keeping ignorance as something open, agnostically embraced. We think that this is a terrible thing. Okay, so we try to fill in the void by finding causes and people who are responsible for that, which can be dangerous, because we tend to assume that people who have a bad fate or misfortune is actually their own fault somehow. So this is one aspect of the justice topic that I think is important. And for us to think more about, should we address questions of justice in the philosophical practice setting? If yes, how? It holds very dear to people. This is one of the ideas that it can actually shatter the worldview, yes, if addressing that critically. But here is my presupposition. I still believe that as philosophers, we are committed to trying to find together for the truth, of getting closer to the truth, as Karl Popper would say, or at least of discarding some errors. And in that way, either getting closer to the truth, or as Montaigne say, as his daughter of alliance, of adoption said, to learn how to be less stupid. Yes. So together, I think this is still philosophy's role. I still think that philosophical practitioners should be as close to philosophy as they can. I still hope that if a person would come to my practice, they would immediately, not immediately, after 5 minutes recognize that this is a philosophy session and not something else. You know, I have this ideal not to stray too far from philosophy in the practice and not too far from the practice in my teaching in the classroom. So if this is so, philosophers have always been at odds with societal values. They've always been, not because they are such maybe by character, belligerent people. They looked hostile. They look people that wanted you to be more radical in your change, in your values. Just the invitation to look critically at what you were brought up with or the values that you hold is something that many people consider an assault on their own self, as if they would relinquish one idea, they are relinquishing an arm or a leg or part of themselves, which is actually true because we are made of our ideas. We tend to forget that. We think that we are made of our ideas. So when Nietzsche said that he would like to destroy the values, it's not an act of external destruction, it's an act of internal destruction. So philosophers are perceived as people who are calling others, just, you know, if we have an ideal of autonomy, to destroy or to look at least into what is in their own self. This is the know thyself, know yourself that actually Socrates was talking about. It was not just knowing in order to knowing, but knowing in order to find your ignorance or maybe to make some changes. So philosophers can be perceived, if they're doing their job, as demanding quite a few changing and quite either hostile or aggressive, and not as giving you, as the social media do, the information that is palatable to you, but to the contrary, other ideas and challenging your own views and etc. If this is so, we cannot say that the philosophical practice goal is, in the simple sense, the commonsensical way of making you feel good. It's not a well-being. It's not a well-being seminar. We may talk about higher ideals. Maybe it's happiness and eudaimonia, ataraxia or peace of mind. Maybe it's self-realization, authenticity. You know, we have many ideas in philosophy that we can use, but they are all more radical, more perfectionist. And even if we make them more meliorist, you know, more tangible, more approachable by the general public, still they are at odds with the well-being that goes around. But if we succeed even a little bit, the benefits are absolutely fantastic, more than the well-being. But this is something that philosophers should explain. But that means that the praxis in itself is not necessarily, you know, it's friendly in the approach, but actually through that friendship, you know, it's a harsh kind of friendship. It's a friend that demands a lot from the client or the student or for your friend, as friends maybe should do. So I wanted to emphasize that as long as we are looking for the truth, even together, or chasing at least some falsity, we should be able to say that this is a falsity, which maybe in relativism we cannot. We all say we are all right. Why not say with Karl Popper, we may all be wrong? This is it seems, you know, almost the same assertion. It's not. It's very different. You may be wrong and I may be wrong. Let's discuss it. And if we are both wrong, we have advanced. If we are both right, how did we advance? And how can we be both right? You know, so some thinking here should take place. We can both be wrong. We cannot be both right. I know there's a fantastic Jewish joke there about the rabbi. There is one person who comes and say this and that and that, and he says, you're right. And then the other says, no, this and this and that. He says, you're right too. And then the third one said, Rabbi, how can you say that he is right and the other is right when they say opposite things? And the rabbi say, you're right as well. So in relativism, this is actually what we are doing. So we need to think this over. Can't we be respectful of each other's views? Can we acknowledge the plurality of views, but still engage in a dialogue, a plurilogue that shows us that we can all let our ideas die for ourselves without dying personally, and that any idea that dies, it's an advance. It's not a loss. And we're doing it together. You cannot do it on your own. All right. So this was just to remind us of what I think is the importance of truth and falsity in our societies, in philosophy, and in our practices. I would like to hear later what you have to say about that. You may think that this is not necessarily so first. And then if it's necessarily so, or so in some sense, even not necessary, that it's very difficult in a practice, you know, especially online, how not to make everybody disappear, talking about topics that nobody heard about, truth and falsity. Yes, they may think you're some kind of very radical religious person, you know, so who talks about truth anymore if it's not Jesus Christ? So this is one topic that I would like you to remember. And now I'm coming to the topic of today. What's about illusion? What about that special case that may be between truth and falsity, as Aristotle would say? You know, it doesn't have that kind of mean between truth and falsity, but let's think about illusion as this kind of mean. When truth would be too harsh, when falsity would be too hard to find, and maybe we can talk about human truth as being some kind of illusion, that if you go for the naked truth, there might be a reason what it's called naked, you need to dress it somehow. You know, somehow truth seems to most people too hard to see directly. Nietzsche said that it's impossible. Other people, Hamlet, you know, Nietzsche said that Hamlet looked into reality, saw the abyss and couldn't stand it. So tragic philosophers say that as well. Other philosophers do not say that, but just construct some beautiful clothes for the truth. The unadorned truth is not considered beautiful. I don't know why we are so shy in meeting naked truth, but apparently we are. So we are clothing her in ways that make her more palatable. See the example of justice, yes? This is an ordained word in which there is justice, even though we don't know it. You know, there is some kind of karma. There is always a reason for everything. And if I don't find a reason, so you may be at fault for being at where you are, or I am at fault for being ill or sick, which adds grievance to my suffering. So let's talk today not about justice, but about a very cute, a very interesting, and a very personal use of illusion. The illusion we hold about our own self, because I want this lecture to be finally light and fun. So the second part of the title is a problem for the wise. The wise person, as Montaigne says, occupy themselves first with themselves, only after that with others. So let's think amongst ourselves. Do we have any illusions about ourselves? Not necessarily personal, but the human being in general may have some illusion about himself or herself. And what's the use of these illusions? And what should we as wise people do with that? Should we address that? Should we combat that? And if yes, how? It's Bertrand Russell who said that every human being walks with a cloud of illusion around him as, you know, a pack of flies. So we may not want to see the truth naked, but we don't want to appear naked to others, and especially not to ourselves. So we have this set of illusions. Believe it or not, scientific research shows that everyone feels a little bit superior to the others. Everyone. So although we know that, that doesn't change it a bit. This is very ridiculous. This is very funny. Imagine a meeting. Everyone believes he knows a little bit better, is a little bit superior to the others. All think that, no one says it. If they would all say that, they would have to laugh and begin anew, you know, but it won't go away. Why is that? Maybe because, you know, we are being tricked or so created as to have a conatus, as Spinoza says. We need to be unduly attached to ourselves so that we may survive. So being unduly attached to ourselves, we have to look up from a certain position to everything else. We may tend to use everything else as object, and we will be the sole subject. Even solipsism, I don't think has ever been refuted in philosophy convincingly. So maybe it's not a philosophic problem only, maybe it's a psychological problem. So we are ridiculously attached to ourselves. We need to be, and we need to take ourselves seriously. That means that we need to take others a little bit less seriously, and we all think that we are a little bit superior to the other. We need to favor ourselves. It's very interesting. And was once in the seminar, and whatever was the outcome of the long list of questions that they asked us, everyone was doomed to prefer his own answers. This is amazing if you look at it, you know, generally, and you understand this, that it will be the beginning of the process and the end of the process as well. So we may call that what? Falsity, error, a certain truth, or maybe a necessary illusion, maybe a kind of self-deception, because of course I'm not superior to you, and a kind of self-deception that may be necessary, that we couldn't take away. Maybe we shouldn't even address that, just acknowledge it gracefully, which is actually what humor does. Let me just interject humor here. Humor is the specific tool for illusion. Humor is the specific tool that shows you a glimpse of truth for a moment, because we cannot take more than a moment, and then restore the illusion. You know, humor is the tool that shows us that we cannot live without the truth, but we cannot live with the truth. You know, it's like a very harsh mistress, and then we need the illusion, but we know it's an illusion. It's a very complex thought, humor, you know. It's an illusion, but it's necessary, although we know it's an illusion. And how, you know, one of the plays of Chekhov ends is that the protagonist shouts to his wife who wants to leave him, "Sasha, stay, I don't want happiness, I just want you." So it's the same thing with the illusion. Stay, you know, I don't want truth, I cannot bear it, I just want you. So one's self-importance, for example, can it be challenged? You know that in philosophical settings, sometimes you see people that take themselves very, very, very seriously. And this may be the cause or the consequence, I really don't know, of some kinds of depressive states. But before they become full depressions, I had a colleague from New Zealand. She told me about my thesis about humor, but if I won't take myself seriously, who will? Well, this is a very deep argument. You know, you may laugh about it. It's a very deep argument. We are under the illusion that we need to take ourselves seriously for things to go on well. People do not believe that cheerfulness and lightness, you know, and doing your job while understanding that we are all a little bit ridiculous is a bonus, rather than some impediment to self-survival. But maybe not for all. Maybe it's a lesson of humility. Maybe some people have to hold fast to who they are and what they are, and we should respect that or not. I would like to hear your opinion about that. So, Russell did not say what we should do with our illusions, although he noted that, you know, they're accompanying us everywhere, you know, like a pack of flies. And, you know, flies are not always very, 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 very easy on animals, and you know, and not easy for the rest of the people to see through the flies. But Montaigne did say something about that. Montaigne did say, listen, I cannot take folly out of my wisdom. I cannot take stupidity out of my knowledge. This is inbuilt. This is part of consciousness. So what can we do with that? This is Galvin, another person who wrote a book about comedy, that suggests that stupidity, ridiculousness, you know, this kind of illusions that we all have that we cannot get rid of can be only graced, for example, in the theater. But he put a proviso. For him, it was possible to grace only others and the theater in the dark. And then you go out and you learn absolutely nothing. This is why we keep going to the movies and to the theater. Otherwise, you'll go to one tragedy, have the catharsis of one comedy, and that will be over, you see? So we have a future philosophical practitioner that they will come back again and again and again because the lesson won't be learned. So my suggestion is that maybe philosophers can grace this foolishness inside themselves and in others by themselves, in themselves. Being very dramatic people, we could be the audience, we can be the person, we can be the dramatist. As Nietzsche said, in the state of autonomy, we are the victim and we are the executioner and the one that legislates. So we could see our foolishness and still judge it while seeing it in other people and find that this is a common, normal human trait or characteristic and still grace it more importantly than in us, than in others. And in that way, find a common ground for humanity. This is what I'm trying actually to do. So this is one option with the illusion. Acknowledging that it's part of us, we cannot get rid of that. Maybe we shouldn't get rid of that, but we can not suffer from it and still acknowledge it by gracing it, but accepting that stupidity or, I don't know, ridiculousness or being overly involved with ourselves, whatever happens to me is tragedy, it happens to others, it's comedy. It's part of human nature, you know, understanding better others in that way, because amazingly, you know, whatever happens to me also happens to the other, and I am an other for the other. You know, this is what Sartre said. So this is for him actually hell, the fact that you are an object for the other. You perceive yourself as a subject, seeing and perceiving the other. And he makes you realize that you are also an object in the other's vision. And I have very bad news. There are more than one other. There are many others, okay? So we need to figure out something here. Many practitioners come with a problem, with an interest, and maybe do not have this capacity or this willingness to look at things from a wider point of view. This is what philosophers do. So my question for you, why should be the attitude of the wise person to illusions? Is illusion a special case between truth and falsity? Is illusion a case of self-deception that might be necessary and then we should address it differently than most cases of self-deception? If differently, how at all? And if it should be touched in the setting? So there could be big illusions, maybe not illusions. Freud talked about religion as an illusion. We do not touch that. What about justice? Should we touch that? What about more personal illusions, you know, of the client, of ourselves, in philosophy in general, in life, and in philosophical practice? Thank you so much.